Hey everybody, welcome to the Inside Tabletop GMG channel. If you're wondering why there's now a separate YouTube channel for Inside Tabletop, it's because the algorithm, as of 2025, no longer responds to subscriber counts and or view counts for putting things up in the algorithm, and my content's getting buried. That means that GMG is basically collapsing financially and subscriber and view count wise, and I now have to play around with the new, after 20 years, and different AI generated version of content creation, which tailors specific kinds of content because the AI can't understand how a channel can enjoy more than one thing. And we're creating 5 new YouTube channels for you to subscribe to. Please subscribe, because if you don't, they can't be monetized and this whole enterprise fails immediately. Inside Tabletop is, of course, the series in which I talk to people who work inside the gaming industry about working in the gaming industry to give you guys some insight behind the curtain into what it's like working in this world, making money, making games, making art, and generally surviving by the skin of our teeth to bring you guys the entertainment that you so crave. So please subscribe. I'll be reposting all the previous Inside Tabletops here for you to enjoy, and new ones in the future. So sit back, relax, let the people chat, and holla at your boy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Inside Tabletop. This is my weekly show where we talk about the current events in the industry from the inside, from the point of view of people who've worked inside it. And this week is another one of my solo weeks where I had some thoughts I wanted to share. They weren't necessarily a conversation. They were more of a video essay. And so that's what we're doing. A big point of conversation right now, of course, in the tabletop world is talking about the sort of division between the people that participate in the miniature wargaming tabletop experience and hobby, and how they seem to start to have divided or floated or maybe just slowly settled into a variety of, I don't want to say camps, but almost like a pie chart of interest that different companies have been catering to differently. And this has been on my mind this past week as a follow-up to the video I did about Kill Team 2024 and the solo and cooperative rules coming out for it. Just showing that there is kind of an awareness maybe in the mainstream gaming industry of the need for there to be a broader spectrum of experience than just playing the game, and whether or not those matched, balanced, tactical head-to-head experiences are what everyone's chasing. What I look at it as is the volume of the conversation, right? So if you were to look algorithmically at the internet, and even just things like YouTube, it's a pretty good metric because it's how people are making money. And if you're going to try and make money through the integration of advertising on things like YouTube or even Patreon, to be directly supported by people, you tend to try and shoot for what is the most popular. And there's sort of two things in that camp right now. The first one is chasing the best way of doing things, whether that's the best way of painting something, the best way of playing the game, or the best way of, understanding or absorbing the lore of the game. It seems like each of these three sort of categories, whether it's the background, the game, or the hobby part of miniature wargaming, seems to have their own idea of what best is, and its own community that is focused on absorbing that information, and therefore is the thing that content creators will go out and make content for, because that's how you make money. If you're trying to become a content creator as a profession, you chase the audience, and the audience is something that is invisible right through the camera. I'm not in front of an audience right now. There's no live studio in here. This is just me by myself. And that means that you are trying to guess what the most people want and how to deliver it to them in the most engaging way, so you can chase that dollar. You can hustle for that money. And I'm kind of in an interesting position where I don't tend to do that. I don't talk about the people playing the game. I talk about the game itself. And so what's interesting is seeing the mainstream chasing that sort of more narratively driven, hobby focused two pillars of the diagram. So if you take that as a big fish wising up to something, or realizing how much they're communicating with a certain type of customer, I found it led to some thoughts. And what that was to me was actually kind of like generational fashion. And this is it's gonna sound weird, but bear with me. One of the things that I've noticed in my current day-to-day existence is that, oh my God, the fashions of the 90s are back. The first time I got an ad for Mod Robe's pants, which are basically just, they're just scrubs. They're just hospital scrubs done in like a fashiony way. That was a thing in the 90s when I was a dirtbag teenager. And because they're popular again, of course, I see targeted marketing for them on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and wherever the hell else you see targeted marketing. And it blew my mind that was a thing that was now, potentially coming back. The wide leg jean, the baggy t-shirt, like it's that fashion is cyclical. And I think that's actually happening in tabletop gaming. And the reason that pegged into my mind was looking at the new Hive Stormstarter set that's been advertised on Warhammer Community. I started thinking about the scale and camera focus of the game. So as opposed to being use lots of models on a relatively sparse game table, it's a relatively big size. And that's the experience we're trying to sell you in like popular pop culture tabletop gaming. We have something much closer to this scale-wise. A more bespoke experience where the rules and the camera action is dialed in. So if you think of it from like the POV of the audience, the current Warhammer 40,000 is very much at 10,000 feet, right? You have a much larger gaming surface using much more like actual material, like war-wise, right? You have Titans potentially and huge super heavy tanks and tanks in general. Whereas when you go back to previous editions of the game, like Rogue Trader and or Warhammer 40,000 second edition, you did not play with that many miniatures. The game itself, in fact, was a more granular, detailed experience where like you could have like half-point equipment in this. The equipment tables for Warhammer 40,000 are designed to design your own units if you want. Even the scenario in here, Battle at the Farm, you have roughly a kill team size amount of Space Marines fighting a slightly larger than the kill team amount of orcs. And that got me thinking, is tabletop stuff going to become generational now that it's been around for about 40 years? Fashion's been around forever, right? So it's an acknowledged thing that eventually, if you live long enough, your generation's faction gets recycled and comes back. You look at it sort of like in decades. Every decade kind of has their time where their thing comes back. And now that we're in roughly 4 decades of this being a pop culture thing, right? There's toy soldiers been around forever too, but as a thing companies try and make money off of, and that people try in the sub market like I am, try to identify the trends for. I think that we are seeing a generational wave, a nostalgia wave. We definitely did with like certain things in the hobby background thing, like bringing back Sisters of Battle, bringing back Necromunda, bringing back Squats, bringing back Blood Bowl. Games Workshop was very aware that nostalgia was a thing to try and mine. And Kill Team 2024 has way more in common with early editions of Warhammer 40,000 than Warhammer 40,000 does. To the point where they're making it in the main studio. This isn't being made in the specialist sort of wing studio, like things like the Middle-earth strategy battle game, Necromunda, the Horus Heresy. They're not siloed out there. This is a main studio game, right? The Kill Team is part of the big box like experience, basically Games Workshop. Meaning they've identified that their customer base inside Warhammer 40,000 isn't as specific as they thought it was, and maybe they've been over-communicating to it. So what could that mean? Well, in the last 2 release cycles of Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team, we saw things like new settings. We saw a spaceship setting with Gallowdark, and then we saw this kind of weird transition into play sets, right? Where in Gallowdark, you got the entire spaceship again and again and again and again, and it was a big price tag. In the previous edition, what you got was these play sets, and then you got a separate mat that was just the gantries, the oil derrick basically that you're fighting on. But every time 2 new teams came out with their little dossier and their models, they would get a piece of terrain to add to that core set. Almost like an 80s like playset would add on to like Castle Grayskull if you're playing like He-Man, or you got the fighter planes to go on the USS Flag if you were one of those person with crazy parents that bought them the USS Flag, which is the giant GI Joe aircraft carrier. You basically had like little expansions that had 2 teams and an add-on, so that it was a little more subscription based, right? The release was a little more subscription based, and there was kind of like a really intentional progress through the story that happened. So it was kind of like kicked off in Galadark, the price tag was a little bit too high, so they kind of restructured the product, and now you have this like movie episodes happening inside the Kill Team story. And I find that really interesting, because what that means is they've basically separated out the Warhammer 40,000 fans that really like small Warhammer 40,000 experiences that tell a cool story in a cool way. And it almost feels like this is what Combat Patrol should have been. Kill Team seems to be moving into that Combat Patrol niche where it's like, no, the rules don't necessarily have to be the same between the 2 games, because in Warhammer 40,000, it's the collection that you're building where you get this immense collection of models over time. What if we had something for the audience that doesn't necessarily want to do that? And so it's okay that the rules are different inside of it. So other game systems don't typically do this because they don't have the amount of stuff. But one that I can think of, which I figured I'd bring up as an example of this working, I think, for other companies, is Catalyst Game Labs with Alpha Strike and Classic Battletech. So it's gone the other direction, and generationally, Classic Battletech is very much this. It's a very hyper-detailed combat system in between 2 to 3 battle mechs. And as you stretched your collection grew and got bigger, because it's, speaking from experience, it's real easy to end up with like 50 to 100 painted battle mechs in a couple of years, which is what happened with me. They needed something to allow for a mass combat system, so they developed Battletech Alpha Strike. And I think that works really well, where you now have 2 classes of game, which is just a completely different way of using your collection, and there's some similarities in between it. Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team, you have to remember, it didn't exist 10 years ago. There was Shadow War Armageddon, but 10 years ago, that was it. That was the first attempt at making a skirmish combat game in Warhammer 40,000. And guess what rule system Shadow War Armageddon used? It used the 2nd edition Warhammer 40,000 rule set. In fact, it was basically the 97 Necromunda, which was also based on the same rule set. So what's really interesting is that kind of proves my point, that going back to the well and recycling old ideas, not necessarily all the way back to the rules, but from the structure of what are you trying to do? You're trying to take the camera focus from way out here and zoom it down in. You're realizing that your audience has, and when I say audience, what I mean is customers, has different appetites for the thing that you make, and so you need to make something to go with that. And if Catalyst Game Labs can win at doing it, so can Games Workshop. And I really am excited for this new level of experience inside of it, because honestly, it's much more for me. One of the things I've noticed with Kill Team so far in the last, I think it's 2016 it came out, it was Shadow War, then Kill Team in 2018. The one thing I've really noticed is it doesn't get a ton, like they say they make balanced data splits for it, and they want to play it competitively, and they want to have a competitive meta inside of it. No one really gives a shit about that. Like, I'll be not to the same volume that they care about it in Warhammer 40K. There are definitely some people inside the Kill Team community that want to play Kill Team that way. For the most part, the vast majority of people playing Kill Team that I've seen, they're really excited to build and paint and play these small unit action games of 40K. Boarding actions, again, attempts to be that for Warhammer 40,000, like an in between the 2 games. You're using the Galadark terrain, and then you're adding, the sort of squad construction and main rules for Warhammer 40,000. But this going back to the idea that the games can be small and you can collect multiple small units, this very much feels in keeping with things like Spearhead. In fact, I think that in the current last 2 editions of Kill Team, what you're seeing that mentality of you buy a box and you play with it. A Kill Team is typically a box of whatever, and you play with those 10 models. That's what Spearhead is in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. There's, I think, some learning inside that where instead of from a game design point of view going like deep into each faction where it's like, oh, I want to tinker and make my own stuff, you go wide instead and say, well, there's other units, there's other squads inside this faction you can play with. Why don't you try those out instead? And the unit counts are roughly the same. The Sylvaneth Spearhead for Age of Sigmar is 10 models. I think the Ideneth one's 14, right? So there is very much the idea that you don't need a lot of miniatures necessarily to play a really fun game that feels like a full game of Warhammer if the detail level is right, if the camera focus is dialed in enough where that individual person having a heroic moment feels appropriate. So there's my two examples. And yeah, I think that other companies that have been around for a long time kind of wise up to this, and they have this cyclical nature where they come back around and they bring into focus again a way of doing things that may be from the past. And that a lot like fashion, there are sort of generational sort of nostalgia-based rollouts inside the tabletop industry where things become popular again, where experiences become popular again. I think you saw it with Dungeons and Dragons during the height of like Stranger Things and the Big Bang Theory, where pop culture swung towards, again, the idea that you can have these experiences and it's completely normal and you can still, date the beautiful girl across the hall. And this is just part of life. And it grew to being something big. It feels like the idea is that those nostalgia waves are now hitting miniature wargaming. So tell me what you think in the comments. Is Kill Team the new 40K? I don't know, but I do see the idea of it becoming increasingly popular as an option as Games Workshop just spends more time and attention on it and is a little bit louder than they normally are about these sort of like narratively driven small unit action experiences inside their Warhammer 40,000 universe, and a little less focused maybe on that head-to-head match play experience. So, but thanks for watching. We'll see you for more Inside Tabletop. Till then, I'm Ash. Happy gaming.